What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danelle Hallan, and I am back with another true crime video. And don't forget that if you prefer to listen to this in podcast form, you can go and check out Crime Bit with Danelle Hallan anywhere that you like to consume your podcast, and it should be there for you. Now, today we're going to be discussing the disappearance of Tyler Goodrich, who is a 35-year-old man that mysteriously went missing just over a year ago on November 3rd. On the surface, Tyler appeared to have it all together. He has a really loving family, a successful career, an active social life within his community, and so his very sudden and bizarre disappearance has left everyone that knows him, along with authorities, puzzled. Now, just recently, his family, friends, and the local community marked the 1-year anniversary of his disappearance, and they're continuing to hold on to hope in their search for answers. But with very few clues and pretty much no leads, they're seeking support to help bring Tyler home. So please share this wherever you can. Really pay attention and listen to the details of this story so we can hopefully bring him home together. Now, let's dive into the details. Tyler grew up in the close-knit community of Bennett, Nebraska, which is a charming small town with a population of only about 500 to 600 residents, at least at the time that he was growing up. He was part of a very busy family, one of 6 siblings, and Tyler stood out not just for his vibrant red hair, an impressive height of 6'1", but also for his infectious personality, his athleticism, and mostly his generous spirit. Tyler's father, Lonnie, is a really highly respected teacher in their town, and he made sure to teach Tyler the importance of things like kindness and community very early on. And from a young age, he put his compassionate heart to use. Lonnie has recanted a story in a few different interviews that he's been a part of a time where Tyler filled his entire little wagon with produce from their garden. And he set off on a mission to deliver all of the produce to their elderly neighbors. Because even being so young, he recognized that his neighbors couldn't tend to their own gardens anymore, and he didn't want them to miss out on the fresh produce they loved. So he took matters into his own hands. And Tyler just continued to blossom with this beautiful character the older that he got. Being a social butterfly in a small town, people were really drawn to his charm and his liveliness. He always had a smile on his face. He was always laughing so loudly. And you really couldn't not have fun with Tyler around. His family describes him as being fun-loving and adventurous and strong-willed to the point of stubbornness. And he loves to spend a ton of time in the kitchen. This man is a foodie. He loves to cook. He particularly loves to bake because he has a sweet tooth. He also is very social. He loves attending social events to make new friends, exploring local trails. He will without hesitation devour an entire pack of Oreos. Tyler's just the kind of person that if you can keep up with him, you're in for a wild and entertaining ride, which is probably why all of these friendships that he forged from such a young age maintain strong to this day. Now, after high school, Tyler ended up going on to serve in the National Guard for 8 years, which was something he was very dedicated to, while simultaneously pursuing a degree in business administration. But in true Tyler fashion, he had his eyes set on something bigger, okay? His goalpost was always moving. Friends of Tyler have said that he's constantly evolving, always seeking to improve himself, and he will, without a doubt, put in the effort to achieve all of these goals. So he took it a step further to obtain his master's, all while juggling a handful of different careers before his disappearance. Tyler worked in Nebraska State Corrections, he dabbled in real estate, and he even opened his own small business selling insurance. He has such a strong desire to discover his true passion and excel in areas where he could make a difference, and not just for himself, but also in his mission to help others. So it was only natural that he eventually landed himself back at Nebraska State Corrections. Tyler knew that that was where he could make the most impact. It is just where he seemed to fit seamlessly. And so he accepted a position as a vocational and life skills project manager. And to put that in simpler terms, his responsibility was to ensure that inmates being paroled had access to things like grants and all of these different resources that would help secure their success after release. And he really flourished in this position. This is where his empathy could shine, his desire to help everyone however he can could shine. So he had a very successful career. While his academic and career achievements were definitely things that were very important to him and had been his entire life, Tyler also had other significant aspirations as well. He really, really wanted to be a husband and a father. In 2015, Tyler ended up meeting a man named Marshall Vogel. They locked eyes at a bar, and the connection was instant. Friends and family said that they were such an incredible couple. They balanced each other out perfectly. Marshall is this like free spirit and a lover, and it really helped to keep Tyler, who is constantly moving, constantly planning, grounded. And after 2 years of dating, they decided to spontaneously marry in the living room of their Omaha home. And so they were starting this new life together. They both worked in Omaha, and after a few years, Tyler and Marshall realized that they were ready to take the next step in their relationship. They wanted to have kids, and Tyler in particular had dreamed of being a father. He grew up in such a large family. He wanted something like that for himself. So they decided to move from Omaha back to their roots in Lincoln, which is actually where Tyler was born, and then he moved to Bennett. They're very close by to each other, and they settled onto a 3-acre property where they not only could raise a family, but also enjoy their passion for animals like goats and horses. They wanted their own little homestead, and the house was ideal. They had the cutest barn out back. They were able to have a couple of different animal enclosures, so they were living just the life that they had hoped for. The house is also on a quiet street just outside of town. To the west, there's pretty rural farmland, and to the east, there's still all of the social activities that the couple enjoys. So this too seemed to offer the perfect balance for them. They were living close to Marshall's mom, they weren't far from Tyler's family, and so this is where their journey to parenthood began. Tyler and Marshall explored all available options. Initially, they considered surrogacy, but in 2020, they ultimately settled on fostering and eventually adoption. And Marshall has shared how they would sit for hours and hours in their office, taking classes, learning everything they could to prepare for parenthood. And before they knew it, they had adopted 2 brothers. Tyler and Marshall's family were incredibly proud of them. They had ensured that both boys were treated with respect and involved in the adoption decisions, which was really important because one of those boys is a teenager. They also worked so hard to keep the brothers close to their other siblings who lived just on the outskirts of town while fostering an incredible home environment. Their lives quickly turned into constant sporting events and school drop-off and homework, and they handled the transition with such grace. Embracing the challenges and the joys of parenting, Tyler's continued commitment to his family, his friends, and the community was unwavering even with all of these changes. Like, as a mother, I'm over here like, I need to know how he balanced it all because I cannot even keep my head screwed on straight. He was still active in local volleyball teams. He maintained these close lifelong friendships. He never forgot a birthday or a special occasion. He was also an avid runner. He would run 6 days out of the week to prepare for all sorts of various races that he participated in. Okay. Everything from 5Ks to marathons. He had participated in like 20 to 30 races in 1 year. So he was really dedicated to that passion of his. So based on everything that I just said, how happy everyone seemed to be, how well everyone seemed to have it together, made what happened the night of November 3rd come as a total shock to everyone. It was so out of left field, so impossible to explain, and to this day, Tyler has not been found. At 7:40 p.m. November 3rd, 2023, Tyler's husband, Marshall, made a call to Lancaster County 911, and he explained to the dispatcher that he and Tyler had just gotten into a pretty heated argument that led to Tyler physically pushing him. And so as he's explaining what's happening and giving the dispatcher their address, Marshall told the dispatcher that he heard the garage door open and at this point assumed that Tyler had hopped in his car and fled from the scene. And so he walked down to the basement where their garage was. He was still on the line with 911 at this point, and he noticed that Tyler's car was still there sitting in the driveway. So after this conversation with 911, they had deputies coming out to the scene. Marshall called his mom at some point, who lived down the road, to pick up their youngest son so that he wouldn't have to be involved with the officers. And within around 10 minutes of this 911 call, deputies arrived at the couple's home. Marshall began to explain to the deputies exactly what led up to this heated argument. He said that the night had been going completely fine until just about 10 minutes prior to the 911 call. He said that the two of them and their youngest son decided to have a pizza and movie night while the oldest son had picked up a shift at work. But as the night was winding down and their youngest son had gone upstairs to his room, a pretty serious conversation began. Marshall told deputies that he and Tyler had been speaking about divorce for the last couple of months at this point. And this particular night, Marshall had formally asked for one. I guess before they were just talking logistics. How would this look? Is this what we want? But Marshall had settled on it and told Tyler he had an attorney and the wheel was in motion. He claimed that Tyler became upset upon hearing this information and ultimately pushed him on his neck and chest. And he said that it didn't hurt, like it wasn't anything, physically serious, but it still happened. It was still unacceptable. So he decided to call 911. Marshall said that when he made the phone call, Tyler kept asking, like, who are you calling? What are you doing? And so he eventually turned the phone around to face Tyler to show him it was 911, and it was at this point that he decided to flee from the home. Now, since Tyler hadn't left in his car, it was assumed that he had gone off on foot, which meant that he could be somewhere nearby. However, after they conducted a brief search inside of the home and around the property, there was still no sign of him. So Marshall decided to gather his belongings and those of the boys, and he planned to stay at his mom's for the night just to kind of give them both time apart. He knew that despite not finding Tyler, he likely wasn't far away and would probably return home once the deputies left. And Marshall didn't want to be there when that happened, so everyone left the house. And he's even gone on to describe one particular instance where he had told Tyler to leave before when they got into some sort of argument, and he woke up in the middle of the night to find Tyler sleeping in the car in their driveway. So he wasn't like causing any harm. I think he just knew the pattern was Tyler was going to come back home, and that wasn't something that he was prepared for. So everyone left the house. It was closed up for the night, but a few hours later, Marshall had no choice but to return. Their oldest son needed his laptop to complete an assignment, and the laptop was back at their house. So still worried that Tyler was home and potentially very upset with him for calling the police, he decided to keep his mom on the line for the entire trip. And again, it doesn't seem it was a very far drive. However, when he arrived at their home, kind of bracing for what he was going to walk in on, Tyler was still nowhere to be found, and his car remained parked outside. So Marshall stayed for about 10 minutes, gathered what he needed before heading back to his mom's house. So at this point, he figured Tyler was really upset, and he was upset as well after what had happened. So he sent a text to Tyler saying, this divorce is not up for debate. He explained that he didn't want himself or their children in the home after Tyler had become physical. So he wanted to make arrangements to retrieve his and the boys' belongings, and they were proceeding with this divorce. He made it very clear he had no intentions of returning to their home or their marriage anymore. And this text went unanswered. But it wasn't until the following morning that the reality that something may be wrong here really began to sink in. At around 7 a.m., Marshall was back at their family house because they still had plenty of animals to care for and feed. Tyler still hadn't responded to the text message he sent. I don't know if Marshall attempted to call him that morning to see if maybe he had fed the animals. So he had no choice but to continue on morning chores as usual. And again, he expected to see that Tyler was likely home, but when he went inside the house, not a single thing had been touched. It seemed that Tyler had never come home the night before. Now, he went on to complete the chores, still finding no sign of Tyler, and at this point, Marshall began to worry, but he was figuring that the most logical explanation at this point was that Tyler just needed to blow off some steam. So he's like, okay, but he didn't take his car, he's not answering his phone, he's obviously still upset. Maybe he called a friend to come and get him. So started to make call after call to all of their friends, and he even stopped at a nearby friend's house to check for Tyler, but no one had seen him. No one had heard from him. This was not making any sense. And so one of the last hopes was that Tyler had plans that morning. He's a very busy person. I mean, when he wasn't with his family during the weekdays, on the weekends, he was packed every single day with something to do. He was running all over the place. And so he had plans that Saturday morning to meet with a coworker of his about a presentation. And this is something that he had confirmed the night before, legitimately just like a few hours before he ran from the home. So if he failed to show up for this, something to do with his job, which was very important to him, something bigger was going on. And sure enough, Tyler never showed. So Marshall at 9:35 a.m. called to report Tyler as a missing person. Now, for the second time, that Saturday, November the 4th, officers arrived at the family home to search the property. Marshall granted them full access in hopes of finding Tyler faster. However, despite an extensive search, there was still no sign of him. There was no indication a crime or a struggle had occurred within the home, outside of the home. There was no explanation at all for his disappearance. And so after a while of searching, at around 11 a.m., Marshall finally called Tyler's dad, Lonnie, to let him know what was happening. Now, it's not really clear why he hadn't thought to ask family members if they knew where Tyler was before reporting him as missing, but it seems that he hadn't, because this oversight immediately upset Tyler's family. And I'm not sure if he was just trying to prolong the inevitable of, Tyler's family realizing there had been an argument and that this divorce was imminent. And, I don't know. I can't tell you why exactly he did that, because majority of Tyler's closest friends that he likely would have gone to live right down the road from his family. So if it was likely for him to go see some of his friends, it was just as likely for him to go to his family. So at this point, Tyler's family, they weren't really sure how to interpret this entire situation. Friends and family started to call Tyler's phone, but it was going straight to voicemail. Tyler was not one to run from conflict. He was a problem solver, so it didn't make sense that he would leave, even with the possibility of authorities being involved. And he also never had his phone off. Like, his connection to life was his relationships with friends and family. So his phone being off was a huge red flag. They also felt the story they were getting wasn't aligning with what they believed Tyler would do. He had spoken to friends of his just days before this about his thoughts on the potential divorce. Tyler had told friends Marshall was the one that was pushing it, but he was really hoping they could save the marriage. He hoped to go to counseling to try and figure things out, but at the same time, he told his friends that he respected Marshall's desire to be done. He had even offered to let Marshall and the kids keep the house, and he would go find a new place to live. No matter which way it went, even if his heart was set on saving things, the comfort and the well-being of Marshall and the kids were a top priority. They had several conversations trying to figure out logistics of a divorce so it would be the easiest on the kids. So the idea that he suddenly went completely against all prior actions and statements and ran off with no intentions of coming back was not adding up. And so as concern grew, everyone came together to try and brainstorm possible explanations, because no one at this point could truly believe that he could be missing. This was entirely out of character. So they assumed there has to just be a misunderstanding and he's going to pop back up. Now, meanwhile, back at the house, authorities were finding nothing at all to assist in their search. Tyler had taken his keys, his wallet, and his phone with him when he left, yet he didn't take his car. The only real useful piece of information came from surveillance from their Blink camera that helped to confirm the timeline. Now, it was an incredibly grainy video. I know that they tried to lighten it up a little bit. People have tried to edit it, but unfortunately, there just seems to be no way to make it clear. But it shows someone running from the garage at 7:41 p.m. with what appeared to be their phone illuminated and being held up in their hand. And that was just a minute after the 911 call was made, aligning with Marshall's claims that he heard the garage door open while he was on the phone with the dispatcher. So everything timeline-wise is lining up. Now, his friends seem to confirm that this looked like Tyler. Based on his movements, the way that he was running, they strongly felt it was him, and authorities agree just based on other relevant details. But his family was hesitant to confirm that it was him. I've even seen some suggestions that maybe this was someone else, but I think that the most logical thing to assume, based on the timeline, no one else was seen coming into the house that way, that it was in fact Tyler. But everyone everyone did seem to agree that the footage revealed a pretty puzzling detail. The surveillance showed Tyler running out of the garage and heading south. And this would have taken him to the very back of his property where the barn and his animal pens were located. And all of that then backs up to several fields and tree lines on adjacent properties. Why would he have grabbed his keys and his wallet and not gotten into his car to leave? And instead of running toward the paved road that he was familiar with, his familiar running path, did he choose to run back behind the house into the darkness? And I have my own theories on this that I will kind of dabble in a little bit later on, but a lot of people seem to think that this choice is really strange. Now, with no sign of Tyler being found at their home, authorities decided to branch out a bit and search Marshall's mother's property nearby just to ensure that Tyler wasn't hiding out there for whatever reason. But they didn't find him or any other clues related to his disappearance. And so by the following day, Sunday the 5th, really the last piece of hope that this was a misunderstanding for his family was crushed. Tyler's final event of his busy weekend was a half marathon that he had been training for, and from my understanding is a pretty popular run for a lot of people in the local community to do. So that Sunday morning, his family headed out to the registration table to wait for him because, like I said, running, was what made him happy. Like, this was his way of finding peace and calm. And so no matter what was going on in his life, like probably more so if there was stressful things happening, he would show up for this run. They didn't feel he would miss it for anything, but Tyler never showed. Now, over the following days, several searches were conducted and social media was just flooded with efforts to locate Tyler. Not only were local PD involved, but the sheriff's department, friends, family, and they also thankfully had ties to local media. So his face hit the news really quickly. And also there was really quick movement on social media like Facebook. A group was created. So people were showing up in the dozens and eventually in the hundreds in just days to assist in searches. Like, the way people mobilized to find Tyler was incredible and should attest to the kind of person that he is and how much he means to the community and the people that love him. Posters were printed out and they were placed all over Lincoln and surrounding towns, and those that knew him best went to look for him at every single one of his favorite spots. They were hoping he was just out there somewhere, maybe upset and confused and conflicted about his marriage, and he just needed someone that loved him to show up. But there was also another really scary possibility. Being a runner, Tyler had a handful of trails near his home that he may have gone to, especially because he seemed to head off on foot. And while it didn't seem in the video that he was necessarily heading in the direction of any of those places, it was kind of like the opposite direction, they didn't want to rule this out as a possibility. So at this point, the theory was that maybe he went off for a run to cool off and he never came back because he physically couldn't. Tyler would frequent Wilderness Park and Pioneers Park. They had lots of trails there that you could just endlessly run on, but the ground there can be challenging. And if he decided, that night in total darkness and emotionally charged to take a run, there were a plethora of ways that he could have been injured. He could have stepped in a hole. He could have, hit a branch and knocked himself out. And so they were worried he was out there. He just needed serious medical attention. So his friends started to search all these different trails at these parks, but unfortunately, there was no sign of Tyler. Posters describing his last outfit were distributed as well in case he was seen walking along a rural road somewhere, or maybe he chose to run in another location that he wasn't familiar with and got lost, or he got hurt in a place that no one would think to look for him. But it doesn't seem that anyone reported seeing Tyler that night.
Family, friends, and volunteers met up at Wilderness Park to search for Tyler Goodrich. People around Lancaster County surveyed the wooded area between Van Dorn Street and Highway 77. I spoke with Tyler's mom, Shelly Goodrich. She says she's overwhelmed and grateful for everyone who went to look for her son. She says it's the kind of thing Tyler himself would be doing for a friend or a stranger.
Tyler is full of life, would give the shirt off his back to anybody, and if this was anybody but him, he would be here doing the same.
Today, the community and those close to Tyler are keeping the momentum alive by spreading the word about his disappearance and talking about who Tyler is.
He just shines. He makes you feel comfortable immediately. Just an all-around amazing human.
Tyler, we're praying so hard for you. We love you so, so much. And we just want you home. I love you.
Authorities decided at this point they needed to start to spread their searches out. And one way that they started to do that was by looking into other homes in the area and if they have surveillance. Because while this is a rural area on the outskirts of Lincoln, there's still plenty of homes. Like, they were kind of in this buffer zone where if you went further west, you were heading straight out into no man's land. And east was like incredibly busy city, but they were in this perfect area where there were homes, plenty of them on larger lots. And so he could have passed by any number of houses and been captured. So they went to these homes and they found all kinds of surveillance systems, but unfortunately, none of them seemed to capture Tyler that night. So did he just go back towards those fields behind his property and somehow never pop back up on a main road by houses? Or did he just continue to run towards a more rural area where no cameras are going to pick him up? At this point, it felt like anyone's guess. His running abilities also made it very possible that he traveled a pretty far distance. Like, I feel like when you have a radius that's set for a search area, for the average person, like, you're going to have like a couple miles. Sometimes 5 is usually where they stretch out pretty far. But when you have someone like Tyler, who can run marathons and was last seen running, they needed to cover a bit more distance. So they brought in helicopters and drones to check across the fields and in tree lines. They also brought out dogs and they checked some of the bodies of water near the house with sonar, including a nearby quarry. There is a river, but nothing was ultimately found. So they reached out to the public. They started asking people to check their properties inside of old sheds and barns and trailers, anywhere that someone may have gone to get out of the cold, because he left his house in a pair of running shorts, like a hoodie, sneakers, and that was it. Like, he was not dressed for any type of cooler temperatures. And this is November in Nebraska overnight. It definitely is going to get pretty chilly. When physical searches didn't seem to be getting them anywhere, they started to hope that digital information might give them some sort of clue. But unfortunately, they just hit another wall. And it opened up like a completely different list of questions, in my opinion. Tyler's cell records showed that he had tried to make a call to a friend at 7:41 p.m., which is the exact same time that he is seen running with his phone from the garage. But that call went unanswered. Now, we don't know if he was trying to get someone to come over and get him, or maybe he was hoping to go and get, some space at a friend's house. Maybe he just wanted advice. No one can really say for sure. But what's odd is that just after this, his phone powered off and it never turned back on. His bank cards had also been on him, but they had not been used. He obviously never came back for his car. So it's not like he was grabbing cash from ATMs and hiding out at a local motel somewhere. It was like he walked into the wood line and never came out, and every single way to trace him just vanished. By now, it seemed like all of Lancaster County was out searching for Tyler. So it was quickly noted that there was one person who didn't seem to be there. Rumors began to swirl, as they do, because not only is Marshall Tyler's husband, but he also was the last to see Tyler, and there had been a disagreement of some kind. He wasn't participating in searches. He wasn't speaking to any of the media. I don't even think he was active on social media. And so speculations of what he may know, why is he staying quiet, began to grow by the exact same weekend that Tyler went missing. And by Tuesday the 7th, just days later, a press conference that was held by Lancaster County Sheriff's Department only fueled the fire big time. They had conducted a warranted search at Tyler and Marshall's property on Monday the 6th. And this would have been, I believe, the third search of that weekend, but I don't think the other ones were like warranted searches. So they were going very specifically to look for something. And interestingly, I think that something was electronics. So they wanted Marshall's phone. They wanted other electronics in the home, which he seemed to give them over fine, but they asked him why while they were there to come down to the station to be interviewed. And they also wanted to interview both of the boys. But Marshall told them that he wanted to get legal representation first. He also wanted to ensure that there would be a trauma-based interviewer for the kids. And so he wouldn't go down there until he had those things in place. And the following day, Tuesday, at the press conference, the sheriff's department stated that Marshall and his family were no longer being cooperative. And this, as you can imagine, only made speculations absolutely explode. And during this time, it was revealed that there had been tension brewing in regard to Marshall and Tyler's family. According to Tyler's family and friends, they were not too pleased with Marshall's actions after Tyler vanished. Not only were they upset that it took him so long to reach out about Tyler's disappearance, that he didn't check to see if Tyler was with them, but only checked with Tyler's friends, but by that Saturday night, they apparently felt so strongly that something was off about the story, so they reached out to Marshall and confronted him, demanding answers about Tyler's disappearance. And according to them, they were met with a wall of just anger and rage towards Tyler, and it took them by surprise. Tyler's family said that they had hoped for and expected worry, hope for finding Tyler, transparency about what happened, and instead, Marshall was hyper-focused on putting all of the blame on Tyler for what was happening, saying things like, how could he do this to us? And Tyler's family said it just did not sit well with them. Like, they were taken back that this is what Marshall seemed to be focused on and worried about. And then after having this challenging conversation between Marshall and Tyler's family, Marshall then for some reason reached out to one of Tyler's best friends and completely lashed out at them as well, also shocking them when it comes to how he was treating Tyler's disappearance. Then the following day, on Sunday the 5th, friends had gathered at Tyler and Marshall's home to help with the searches, and yet again were met with this strange, abrasive behavior. It seemed that Marshall didn't want to communicate with them, and he was still putting all the focus on placing blame on Tyler instead of trying to locate him. And then on Monday, there was even allegedly an incident with Marshall's mom. Tyler's family had been at Marshall and Tyler's home while the warrant was being executed. They were trying to help search for him. And I guess Marshall's mom allegedly got so heated and angry speaking about Tyler to his own family that authorities had to step in and tell her to back off. It just seemed like such a strange situation. And I don't know if it was just the way they were dealing with this confusing and emotion-packed time. Was this residual anger from the argument Friday night? Or is this something completely different? Now, Marshall pretty quickly hired an attorney, and by Thursday, he was at the sheriff's department to be interviewed. So it didn't take him long to have all of that settled. Both boys were also taken to the local crisis center to be interviewed properly and ensure the sensitivity level needed for two kids that had already been through a lot. I cannot even begin to imagine what this must have been like for them. And just after these interviews, the sheriff's department actually had to publicly retract their previous statement where they said Marshall was uncooperative. And Marshall's been pretty understanding of this, saying that he totally gets why they did what they did. He understands why the focus is usually on the person's partner. I would honestly be pissed because it's not like he was refusing searches or saying he'd never talk to police. He had an open door policy. He just wanted an attorney first. So the fact that the department went out and placed a target on his back just isn't a great move, in my opinion. And despite their attempts to backtrack their words, unfortunately, that damage was already done. A seed had already kind of been planted, and so focus still remained on Marshall. But it seems that Tyler's family and Marshall kind of tried to put their differences aside and push on despite what was happening. So by November 24th, Tyler's family decided to bring in their own dogs. The investigating agencies had brought in their own dogs originally, but I guess they weren't tracking dogs, and that seems to be what Tyler's family felt was needed. They didn't have any idea where Tyler went after leaving the garage and heading south, and so they hoped maybe a dog could pick up a scent and give them a better idea of the direction that he went. So Marshall gathered up a handful of items that belonged to Tyler to be used as scent articles, and they hoped for the best. They crossed their fingers because they had nothing at this point. But they also recognized that it had been 20 days. So I'm not really sure how exactly that affects accuracy or credibility with these tracking dogs, the scent dogs, but they wanted to give it a go. It was worth trying. And so 2 dogs were brought in separately, and both ended up tracking the exact same route, which to me kind of speaks in and of itself. But where they tracked also, in my opinion, seems like it would make perfect sense. So the dogs followed a scent trail from Tyler's garage toward the back of the property. So it's already adding up with what surveillance knows happened. And then Tyler cut over to a neighboring lot, zigzagged through a tree line, and then followed a dirt road along a ditch before ultimately coming back up onto the road that Marshall and Tyler lived on. So he made like one giant half circle type of situation. And he would have come up, according to the dogs, right beside a fire station. So obviously my first thought was, oh my goodness, do they have surveillance footage? Like, was he captured there? Is there any way we could at least confirm the dogs even further? But unfortunately, it doesn't seem there was any surveillance that captured Tyler that night. But then after they tracked Tyler, coming up beside the fire station, back onto the road their house is on, the scent goes away. Completely stops right there in the middle of the road. And so this brought up a pretty huge possibility that Tyler got into a vehicle. But whose vehicle would he have gotten into? He hadn't successfully called any friends that would have known to come pick him up. No neighbors came forward claiming to have picked him up. I mean, his phone legitimately turned off moments after he ran off. And it doesn't really seem like the kind of place that random people would be driving through unless they lived right there. But it's just so hard because the scent was 20-something days old. And authorities are not even recognizing it because of that, but being one of like the only bits of potential information about where he may have gone, it's just really hard to let go of this as a huge possibility to where Tyler may have gone. So they were back at square one, and again, the rumors were just swirling away. Despite the sheriff's department coming out and saying that Marshall wasn't a suspect, he wasn't a person of interest, and that he was cooperating, he took a polygraph test that he passed. Authorities even came out like a second time to say he's not a person of interest. He's not a suspect, to try to get people to stop accusing him of all sorts of things. But people just really didn't seem to be buying it, especially because more information came out that people deemed suspicious. It came to light that Marshall had recorded the entire argument that he and Tyler had before he called 911. And a lot of people seem to think this is so strange for him to do. And I personally just don't really understand why people are kind of focusing in on this particular detail of the night. We're in a day and age where everyone records everything, okay? Everything, even the things nobody needs to see, all right? People regularly record tense arguments for their own protection, especially since a divorce was kind of in the works. Sometimes attorneys suggest you do that. There's about 1 million different reasons why someone would want to do this. And ultimately, I think it helped solidify the timeline further. So I'm not really seeing, what the reasoning is behind people thinking this is so strange. The recording was timestamped to 10 minutes before the 911 call, so it gave perfect insight to the tone of the entire conversation, what Tyler was saying, where his head may have been at, and what happened just before he ran off. Like, when you create a video like that, there are ways to check when it was taken, exactly the time, exactly the date, sometimes even the location. At least I know that happens on iPhones. So this was an incredibly helpful bit of information. And they were also able to confirm that the recording stopped right as Marshall called 911. So there isn't even like a questionable gap of time afterwards. But still, people also seem to think that it's strange that the recording stopped right before the 911 call, which again, I don't personally get, because phones just kind of automatically do that when you go off of one app to do something different. And also, if you're stopping one thing and going to the other, you could naturally do that. So I also just don't really see anything strange about that. And also, the officially recorded 911 call picks up right after this recording stops. So again, no unaccounted for bits of time. Now, the recording of this conversation has not been publicly released, but several family members and friends have seen it along with authorities, and they have given kind kind of their 2 cents and perspective as to what they heard. Now, so far, no one seems to think that it was like a serious argument. I feel like it's easy to hear there was an argument and 911 was called and think like the absolute worst, but there really is like a spectrum of how fine to awful things can be. There was apparently no yelling in this conversation, and it was mainly just civilized talking. So it wasn't even like some big, awful screaming match. But one of Tyler's close friends did say that toward the end of this recording, it almost to them seemed that Marshall began to antagonize Tyler, telling him that he's not the victim. And this friend also claimed that it seemed like he was trying to get some sort of reaction out of him. And unfortunately, it seems like this worked because at the end of the recording, something in Tyler just kind of flips a switch. There is not an obvious reason why. It doesn't seem anything in specific was said. Who knows if something physically happened that you couldn't see. But at this point, there is a brief noise of a scuffle in the recording, and then the recording ends. It seems to just line up with the claims that Marshall made that there was some sort of physical situation that occurred before 911 was immediately called. Marshall at this point finally decided to post to social media because he, I guess, wanted to try and clear things up. But one of the first few sentences really threw people for a loop. Quote, Tyler was sometimes physically and emotionally abusive towards me. Marshall went on to say that Tyler had a history of domestic violence in a previous relationship, and even said that Tyler's father, Lonnie, knew about the abuse in their relationship, so it was not some big secret to everyone. Like, this seemed to be, I don't know if he was insinuating this was a part of Tyler's past that people were trying to keep quiet or what exactly he was doing, but he then went on to say that over the last few months, their relationship had very drastically gone downhill, and he even claimed to have several recordings that proved the verbal abuse from Tyler toward him was escalating. And then he went on to speculate what happened that night and why Tyler ran. He said that Tyler had managed to get out of his previous domestic violence charges by taking some class, but he likely knew when 911 was called this time that he wouldn't be able to as easily get out of domestic violence charges. So in an attempt to stay out of trouble, he ran from the cops. Marshall stood by all the decisions that he had made up to this point, saying they were all to protect their boys.
Our relationship was changing, but people need to know that there was still so much love there. Just because our relationship was ending never meant that Tyler wasn't going to be part of my life forever. Those weekly calls get harder and harder because the tips slow down, you know. You want answers. You want to know what happened. And it's disheartening when there's just no update.
Marshall told me he's constantly worrying about doing everything he can to get the kids through this. He and Tyler have 2 teenage boys, and the speculation on social media concerns him to the point where he had to talk with their sons about safety precautions.
The thing that has been really scary with the online comments is when people say, I'm going to go to their house and I'm going to start following him. Let me know what I can do to help. It's just, when I read that, I was terrified because the boys were driving my car to school that day.
The reason he broke his silence last month was because people were coming up with theories about one of their children.
When we adopted the boys, one of the promises I made to myself was to be the best dad I could for them. And to see them have to go through this, it's a failure to me.
As the searches continue, Marshall wants people to center their efforts on what's really important.
The ultimate goal and the only thing that we need to focus on is bringing Tyler home.
Now, this Facebook post was not really received well by Tyler's family and friends. They felt like it was disrespectful to throw around allegations like that when Tyler isn't here to defend himself. They also seemed to claim that a lot of what Marshall was saying about Tyler was highly exaggerated. Tyler's father ended up coming forward in response to this post and said that he had only been called one single time in the 6.5-year marriage that Marshall and Tyler had, and in regard to any sort of violence. During this call to Lonnie, Marshall had made allegations that he had been physically abused by Tyler. So right away, Lonnie called Tyler to figure out what was going on, and Tyler insisted that it was all a lie. And he was able to pass the phone to someone who had seen the whole thing go down, who also confirmed that no physical abuse took place. One of Tyler's close friends also came forward to kind of shed more light on that previous domestic violence charge. This charge apparently occurred back in 2014, so about a year prior to Tyler meeting Marshall. I don't have any details at all on these charges, but according to Tyler's friend, at the time they occurred, he had been struggling with alcohol, and it had led to some pretty poor choices, and so he made a mistake. It was awful. He learned from it, and from that point on, he had been sober. For the past 7.5 years, he had not touched alcohol. So it doesn't seem like they believe whatever occurred in his past was some sort of pattern of behavior. Authorities also were able to confirm that there were no records that there had been any calls out to the home in regard to domestic violence, which by no means indicates it wasn't happening. It just may not have been reported. But basically, you can see what I'm getting at here. It was just kind of one person's word over another's and just a bunch of upset across the board.
His brothers and sisters are desperate for answers.
He's been missing in Lincoln for nearly 2 months, and there's been no activity on his phone, social media, or bank accounts.
Newswatch 7 at 9's Alex McClune has the exclusive interview with his family.
We all see each other a lot.
The Goodrich siblings have a hole in their hearts this holiday.
Usually we're getting ready for Christmas Eve. That's kind of our big holiday as a family together.
Jenny, Angie, Jordan, and Felicia are at the park by their parents' home in Bennett, where there's food and fun.
Always playing with all the kids.
But are now without their middle sibling. Deputies believe this video shows Tyler's last sighting outside his driveway the night of November 3rd, after investigators say a conversation with his husband led to a 911 call and was reported missing by his spouse.
We've never said he had anything to do with it.
Friends and family searched across the county.
Lincoln Parks came out and helped every single day.
The family says it's hard to stay hopeful, passing signs almost every day.
There's usually something, whether it's driving down the road and seeing his picture on a flyer, just a memory that pops up.
Lancaster County Sheriff's Sergeant says the case is hitting a standstill, receiving numerous tips a day, but officials are now retracing digital and physical footsteps.
We need a break in the case so that we can bring Tyler home.
The siblings are holding on to the memories this holiday.
Now, it does seem like Tyler was running to try and hide, so it doesn't seem like Marshall and what he's saying could potentially be that far off. It's just figuring out what exactly Tyler was running from. And again, logically, it sounds like he might have been running from the cops. And if you're trying to hide from the cops or deputies or what have you, if you want to get technical, you're probably not going to run along the main road, okay? I think that's like running from the cops 101. But what you are going to do is probably run into darkness and into the cover of buildings or trees, so it's harder to find you. So to me, it just makes sense that he ran to the back of the property for that reason. If he was truly hiding from authorities, he probably also wouldn't want to be in his car, which is a huge identifier. But in the same breath, his choice to run out back also makes it seem like he didn't plan to sit there for very long, that he was going to be out there watching from a distance as long as he could, and then he would come back. So why did he never make it back to the house? He had spoken to a close friend earlier that day. He was excited about his weekend plans. It really does feel like something awful had to have happened when he went back into those fields. Now, I'm personally very curious to know how a lot of people are so confident that he never, in fact, went back to the home. Like how people seem to know for sure. Maybe there's cameras at all entrances. I mean, if you have a camera on your garage, something tells me you're probably going to have other ones. Maybe they can confirm that way that he never went back to the house. I also think the fact that his phone was powered down could also indicate that he turned it off so he couldn't be found. He had a Samsung of some kind, so I'm not really sure if there's a Samsung equivalent of Find My iPhone, or maybe he just didn't want the chance of it ringing or lighting up to give away where he was. Maybe he thought the deputies were going to have Marshall call him and then they'd hear him out back and come and search for him. And while I definitely think all of that's possible, just like before, if he did that, why did he then never turn it back on? It just feels like some things add up to suggest the most logical, which is that he was trying to stay away from getting in trouble with the police, but something happened afterwards against Tyler's will. Whether that be an accident or at the hands of someone else is just unknown. The momentum in the search for Tyler continued for the following weeks that turned into months. A few bogus leads did seem to come in. One was a handwritten letter that indicated Tyler was hit by a drunk driver. And since it was handwritten through Crime Stoppers, they had a really difficult time tracking its source down. They held a press conference trying to find this person to ask them further questions, but I have seen it updated that it was confirmed to have just been a psychic vision. And while there may have been no validity to that claim, I mean, it does bring up another possibility. If Tyler had been walking in the dark, in dark clothing, again, emotionally charged, not fully paying attention to what's happening around him, maybe someone driving on the road didn't see him. He was wearing a pair of gray shorts and a black hoodie. Nothing about that is going to really stand out to a vehicle in the middle of nowhere. I'm unsure if they checked all of the surrounding roads for signs of a potential pedestrian vehicle accident. I'm not even sure if all accidents like that leave evidence that they occurred behind. But I do, however, feel like more times than not, situations like that end up being hit and runs, which would lead to finding Tyler on the road, and that never happened. Every possible theory just inevitably seems to hit a dead end.
It's a story that's drawn eyes and support from all across the country. Over the last few weeks, I sat down with a Lancaster County Sheriff's Office investigator and a handful of people closest to Tyler to get a better sense of who he is and the impact his disappearance has had. 366 days later, and still no trail to follow.
I don't want to consider it a cold case, but at this point in time right now, we just don't have any real investigative leads that are fruitful.
The night of November 3rd casts a long shadow over so many lives. Tyler's father, Lonnie.
What happened to him, you kind of get the rabbit hole conversations and too many tears, too much anger.
His husband, Marshall.
There's never a moment in the day where I'm not thinking of it.
Lifelong friend Stephanie.
We would play in the sandbox, mix sand with dirt, and make cinnamon and sugar is what we would call it. Can I give you guys?
We last saw her handing out missing posters.
This year has been the worst year of my life.
And Nebraska Department of Correctional Services co-worker Danielle, just to name a few.
We don't know where to go moving forward. We don't get that laughter. You don't hear Tyler down the hall like we always did.
Replay every moment, every decision. You wish that you could change things.
Lonnie, left wondering if his son will ever return, takes to a nightly ritual.
I do not go to bed without going to this window and the window on the door and seeing if he's going to come up my driveway and talking to him.
A similar tradition, the flickering of a silent candle in Marshall's home, pleading for closure in this wilderness of not knowing.
I'm going to make sure that that light stays bright. For him and for us.
I let him know that any day that he wants to come home, he can walk up that driveway and he's welcome, that there's nothing but love waiting for him.
His family has been as active as possible on their Facebook page, utilizing it to put together organized search efforts and to raise awareness. If for some reason he had decided he had enough, if this was too much for him to manage, his husband leaving him, feeling like he's losing his family, maybe he ran off somewhere and he's out somewhere safe and sound and his face just hasn't spread far enough to the right person. But it sounds, according to his family, like this isn't something they believe he would do. Now, they're still organizing searches. Authorities have also been tracking down every lead they can. They asked his family to search a 6-mile stretch of rural road at one point, but despite chasing every potential lead, it doesn't seem anything solid is bringing them answers or even a specific direction to go. It's all a shot in the dark. It also seems like this is still considered a missing persons case. No sign of foul play has so far been found. With the tension between people in Tyler's life, the mass speculation and rumors online, Tyler's family has done what they can to try and separate themselves from it. They do the best to delete accusatory comments on Facebook, but with so many followers, it can be difficult. So if you are going to go and follow along, try to be respectful of their wishes, try to be supportive. They themselves have said that if you want to participate in speculation and theories, there are like a dozen other Facebook pages that have been created by people other than family where that seems to be the main focus. Their focus is finding Tyler, sticking to the facts to hopefully figure out where he is and how to bring him home. And so with that being said, there is something that I really, really hope that authorities, his family, search parties have considered. And it was one of the first things that I thought of when I started looking into this case. And I think it's because Caleb Harris's case has genuinely traumatized me for life. I genuinely hope that someone has looked into old property records in that area. Rural areas like that are dotted with old wells that may not have been properly sealed up. Land like that gets split up and like houses are torn down. Like there's so much that changes on land like that. And new wells are dug, old ones are forgotten about. I am just so scared because where I live, you can so easily stumble across old wells like that in the middle of the woods that you would never expect to see there. And if you're not looking or it's dark, it can end in disaster, especially when leaves are falling and covering the ground around fall time. There's the GIS websites. There are ways to look up maps to find where these old wells were just to be sure. People have kayaked down rivers, grid searches have been done. It just isn't making sense that he hasn't been found. And he could have only made it so far on his own. So either one hell of a coincidence occurred and he ran into the wrong person, or he is somewhere around that house. Or maybe he has done what no one thinks he would have ever done and gone on to live a new life. We don't have anything to suggest either one of these is more likely than the other. Tyler's father has said, quote, "I know him too well. Tyler could never do this to us. He could not do it to his friends, to his coworkers, to his family. My son is dead. He's not missing. His body is missing." So as you can see, it seems that Tyler's father strongly believes it's possible that Tyler's no longer alive. And not just that, but he's going as far as saying that he believes someone killed him the night of November 3rd after he left the house. Friends of Tyler's do seem to agree that someone would have had to have hurt him for him to not come home. And Marshall has openly stated that he has no choice but to believe that Tyler is alive because nothing says otherwise. It's just a waiting game to see if the evidence eventually speaks. So it seems that the most help at this point would be from tips. Someone that maybe saw or heard something that needs to come forward. Tyler's friends and family are still actively pushing to get his name out there. They just last month held something called Tunes for Tyler, which was a concert to hopefully rejuvenate efforts to find him and also to raise money for those efforts. They've also helped push legislation to make October 17th Nebraska Missing Persons Day, and they were able to celebrate that for the first time last month as well. There's also an active GoFundMe set up so you can help provide to the search efforts. And if you are local, again, please make sure to closely follow the Facebook page. They have well over 20,000 followers at this point and plenty of opportunities to volunteer to help Tyler's family. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Tyler's story. If you have any information at all about his whereabouts, any information about that night in particular, November 3rd, 2023, all of the information and numbers where you can put that into the right hands is linked down below. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallan fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.